Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the El Burro Estate Lot 17 Wash Process Panama from Substance Cafe. And there's the bag right there. And Substance, based out of Paris, France, and they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on numerous occasions, including our most recent European coffee roaster tier list, where they were the coffee roaster that we placed highest on that version of the list. And that was largely due to the coffees that we had reviewed from them up to that point. However, I also mentioned that there was a review coming up from them that I enjoyed even more than those coffees, and that is this one right here, as I was extremely excited to get the opportunity to pick up this coffee, given that it is yet another wash processed Panamanian Gesha, and those do tend to be my favorite coffees in the entire world. So I'm definitely looking forward to discussing yet another one from this coffee roaster, as this right here is day 61. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Substance's recipe, which is a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 91 degrees Celsius, about 195 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee. Substance is notorious for being one of the lightest roasting coffee roasters in the world, and that is certainly the case with this coffee right here, as it definitely skews on the very light side of things, the extremely light side of things by most standards and metrics, as it's certainly one of the lightest roasted coffees that we've reviewed on this channel. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 39, first impression through the V60, and the coffee itself was already pretty sweet, as it had that slight cereal grain quality to it, presented in the sweetness, with it being very clean and well defined, especially within the jasmine quality of it. This coffee, unsurprisingly, very floral right from the onset, as it's relatively intense for an extremely light profiled Panamanian Gesha, with a lingering tropical brightness presented as well. A very lovely first impression, as this coffee was everything that I was looking for within it, and more, given that it still offered that intensity. But that was also the case with the Deborah Terroir that we had reviewed from them, as that coffee did turn out slightly more intense than I've experienced. And this gives me a great opportunity to kind of pause and highlight why I enjoyed Substance a bit more than some other coffee roasters that are kind of within this same category. And it's because brewing Substance's coffees have just been a little bit easier, as even here on this day 39 mark, this coffee is a bit more intense than I usually experience when I try a coffee out for the first time with some other coffee roasters that are in this extremely light profile. I'm even thinking of coffee roasters like H&S that I enjoy a lot, as oftentimes it takes even more time for me to get those coffees right, but this one was great right off the first impression. Day 42, do the Chemex, and the coffee is relatively toned down compared to the previous day, as it does still have a very floral forward experience, but the overall sweetness is not quite as intense. Florality also a bit toned down and subdued relative to the first day, as there's a lightness to the coffee, and it certainly felt like some adjustments were going to be needed from this point going forward. As on day 45, we opted for the April Brewer, and the coffee is a bit more reminiscent of that second impression as opposed to the first, as it does feel relatively toned down compared to our initial brew of this one. Though the florality does continue to remain the most prominent aspect of this coffee, the hints of tropicality are felt with the immensely clean base and above average level of sweetness yet again. So even then, this coffee is just still very pretty, and I would say very well defined, especially within the aspects that are as pronounced as they are. Day 48, through the V60 with Substance's recipe, and the coffee is the best it had been to this point, as it's presenting a very clean but moderately delicate sense to it, as there's enough intensity to present the profile in a very well-defined florality sense, as the jasmine continues to carry throughout the entirety of this one. As the coffee does sit on the palate, the listed passion fruit becomes a fair bit more apparent, with the coffee offering just exceptional experience all around. Day 51, through the Chemex with Substance's recipe, and the coffee is still presenting very well with excellent clarity and definition, and plenty of intensity once again, as it never really lost the above average level of intensity. Even on some of the more toned down days, I would still say that it was a bit more intense relative to your average extremely light profiled coffee. Consistent with the jasmine coming through as the most pronounced characteristic, and some slight citric qualities to it as well. Still offering plenty of sweetness, so another very nice day of this coffee. Day 54, through the V60 with Substance's recipe, and the coffee is back to its best, as it's expectedly very Gesha-like in a number of ways. most specifically the clarity and florality as the jasmine continues to present throughout, definitely being the most pronounced characteristic and quality within this coffee. The above average level of sweetness as well as some slight sugariness within the fruits also remains some additional factors. Those were presented in a slightly stone fruit-like sense, as well as a tropical berry that's in line with the listed passion fruit. I think that the only notes they had on here were something along the lines of, I want to say it was floral. Passion fruit, I do remember it being one of them. But in addition to that, there is a citric lemon quality being the second most abundant characteristic within this coffee. As you can see, it's presented in an extremely Gesha-like sense. All right, so let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And one thing I did find extremely funny about this tasting wheel is that it mirrors exactly another tasting wheel from another Panamanian Gesha that we are reviewing. As I just finished recording that review and then I started recording this review and I noticed that these tasting wheels are 100% identical. But let's go ahead and go through this tasting wheel and we'll start with the cleanliness level 5. This one, unsurprisingly, extremely clean, and this is why we reserve the cleanliness for washed Panamanian Geshas usually, or washed Ethiopian Geshas as well, because there are very few coffees that offer this level of clarity to them, and this one just had a very well-defined jasmine-like aspect to it, about as clean and pronounced as you could imagine, and that's why the florality also scores there at the level 5. So not surprising that either of those two things do score as high as they are. That's the trademark and the main reason why I enjoy washed Panamanian Geshas as much as I do. Immensely clean, immensely floral, and that was very apparent within this coffee. Handful of level 4s. We'll start with the finish, level 4. The finish is kind of interesting because even though this coffee is just so delicate and presented within that floral sense, it does have that kind of lingering passion fruit-like aspect, that tropical quality to it within the finish that does seem to linger on the palate a little bit. So level 4 for that is kind of interesting. Sweetness, level 4. A lot of the sweetness does present itself in a more sugary sense, and it does complement the floral components, which can feel a little sweeter as well, though they're still florals at the end of the day, so they're not going to be the most sweet thing. But I think I was just experiencing enough of those sugary qualities, especially within a fruit sense, to justify this one being a little higher in that regard. Citrus fruit, level 4. And for this coffee, I do have to say that it's probably a lot more in line with the citric lemon. I can see a slight bit of a lime-like aspect to it, but for the most part, it's pretty focused on that more yellow-like tone within that citric quality. Let's go ahead and move on to level 3s. We'll start with the acidity, level 3. Not surprising whatsoever. I do have to say that the majority of coffees we have had from Substance have been on the slightly lower side of that within our experience, so that's pretty in line with that. That's also in line, and generally speaking, with these extremely light profiled coffees in general, is oftentimes they can feel, I'll say, slightly tame and subdued in general. And this is also a washed Panamanian Gesha, so it's not ever intended to be the most bright coffee out there. Berry fruit, level 3, I've mentioned on a couple occasions that passion fruit, that's one of the notes they had listed on here. Definitely one of the most picked up notes, most specifically within the finish of this coffee, so I could certainly see that being there at that level 3 mark. Stone fruit, level 3, I was able to experience a bit more of a sugary stone fruit quality. I'm thinking a bit more in line with something like a white peach that's presented in this coffee. Bit more tame, bit more delicate, bit more subdued in general, given that this is a washed Panamanian Gesha. And then the final thing worth discussing is the body at the level 1. And I don't think that's really surprising. I have a feeling that a lot of these washed Panamanian Geshas that are extremely light profiled are probably going to come out this way, as they have that very tea-like body to them, and there isn't a whole lot of texture to this coffee, which has never been a problem for me. It's actually kind of in line with what I'm hoping for and expecting with Panamanian Geshas, because I think it kind of adds that delicacy and just overall tameness to these coffees. So as I am looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I actually did like this coffee a bit more than the Burro Terroir, and even though both of them were offering really nice intensity and really nice floral experiences, I do have to say that I think I just liked the sugary aspect, the sweetness of this one a slight bit more, as it felt maybe... You kind of have an idea of what to expect with both of these producers. So Lamastas in this case, and then Savage with the Burro Terroir. And their coffees do just kind of present themselves in a very specific way. And this coffee did present itself, I want to say, with a bit more intensity to them. Now, both were above average in terms of the overall intensity, but I think I just seemed to like the way that this one presented itself a little bit more. Excellent clarity. Both of them did have excellent clarity and tremendous florals. And this one very well defined refined within that jasmine sense. So many positives I had to say about this coffee, and I would easily say one of my favorite coffees that we've reviewed on this channel up to this point, though it is very much my type of coffee. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. I feel like it's a little tricky because this coffee does have that extremely light profile to it, so that's kind of the first place I have to start, because I've felt like these extremely light profiles can be slightly off-putting for some, as they can be a little difficult to get right. But for whatever reason, I've never had difficulty working with Substance's coffees, at least their higher end coffees, when getting them right. For whatever reason, they just feel really easy for me to brew when compared to some of their contemporaries as well. So for me, it's not that difficult, but I know it can be tricky for some people. But if that's not a huge issue for you, then somebody that does look for those very clean and floral forward experiences, especially within Panamanian coffees, as this one offered an abundance of those qualities: immensely clean base, immensely floral experience, a lot of citric qualities to it, all presented in a slightly above average level of intensity and plenty of sweetness. Also, what kind of separates this one a little bit is that unique, more tropical aspect within the finish. So that's the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not subscribed. This right here has been a review of the El Burro Estate Lot 17, Wash Process Panama from Substance Cafe. Thank you for watching.